Ethnic nationalism is a term rarely used today, and where it is used, it is often conflated with so-called extreme ideas. In this video series, we will aim to show how ethnic nationalism, far from being something extreme, is rooted in human nature and common sense. Given there are so many misconceptions about ethnic nationalism, especially when the term is used among Europeans, in this video we will start at the beginning. To do this, we will first look at the words ethnic and nationalism individually, before bringing them together to give us a basic definition which will lay the foundation for future videos. So what does the word ethnic mean? The word ethnic today is often used in ways that express a subgroup within a nation. You may have heard of trivial terms like ethnic food, which in the West is a rather vague reference to non-European cuisines. It is also used in far more politically charged ways too, such as the term ethnic minority. Again, in the West, this denotes someone who is not European, but living within a European nation. In both these terms, from a host nation's perspective, they carry notions of the other. That is, something uniquely distinct and obviously identifiable from the majority. This definition, though, slightly obscures the fact that the majority is also an ethnic group, that like the minority is uniquely distinct and obviously identifiable. This is obvious in the original meaning of the word too, from the Greeks, or should I say the Hellenes. For the Hellenes, ethnicity was based on the commonality of 4 distinct groupings. That is, a common ancestry, a common tongue, a common religion, and a common way of living. Despite modern attempts to water this definition down as an either-or type grouping, it is clear, at least to the Hellenes, that is, the ancient Greeks, that to be a Greek, a commonality had to be identifiable in all areas. This definition is most famously explained by Herodotus, who is often given the titles the father of history and the father of ethnography. In his famous work on the Greco-Persian Wars, the Spartans become increasingly concerned that the Athenians will betray them. Herodotus gives us the Athenian response to such an accusation. First, there are many great reasons why we should not do this, even if we so desired. First and foremost, the burning and destruction of the adornments and temples of our gods, whom we are constrained to avenge to the uttermost, rather than make covenant with the doer of these things. And next, the kinship of all Greeks, in blood and speech, and the shrines of gods and the sacrifices that we have in common, and the likeness of our way of life, to all which it would ill beseem Athenians to be false. These shared commonalities were so powerful that despite Greek city-states being in an almost constant state of war, all differences were put aside when their common ethnic group was under threat from an outside force. We can see this in our own lives too. Whilst we may have disagreements, even severe ones, with family members, if they suddenly find themselves in a tough situation or in some kind of danger, most people will put these differences aside and reach out to assist one of their own. Ethnicity could therefore be described as essentially the idea of a wider family, a common and shared identity. The closer you are to another, the closer the bonds of attachment, something which we can all relate to in our own lives. It could be visualized as concentric circles with you at the center. First, there is family, then ethnicity, As you move further away, the shared bonds become less recognizable as self. This is also in keeping with the etymology of the word ethnos too. The word has its roots in a Proto-Indo-European word for self. Ethnicity then is an extension of self, much like your family. The closer someone is to you, the easier it is for you to identify with them, to understand them on an intuitive level. In the Germanic languages, the word ethnic is similar to words like folk or kin, which further underlines the point of familial connection. The only area of contention with its definition is where these lines are drawn. How much in common do you have to be of the same ethnicity? Well, if we again go back to the Greek understandings, we may be able to glean some insight. The Athenians considered the Spartans of the same ethnicity, despite being different city-states. Geography or nation boundaries are not included in the definition of ethnicity. So a modern example could be that of a native Brit and an Australian. Australia's founding stock was British and Irish, and despite having a very different climate and environment, our cultures and religious ideas are still very similar. So a modern Australian with ancestral ties to Britain and Ireland could certainly be classed within the same ethnic group as a modern British or Irish citizen. But some may decide that because there is a degree of isolation and different environments, Australians have begun the process of ethnogenesis. That is the forming of a new and distinct ethnic group. This is something that only the parties involved can decide, if they should embrace their common roots and traditions, or instead embrace their differences. Ethnicity-based laws are still present in many countries, especially related to immigration. For example, in modern Greece, a Greek can, if they wish, pass on their Greek citizenship to their children, no matter where they are born, and that child can then pass it on to theirs. This can occur indefinitely, regardless of if any of them ever return to Greece. This again highlights the idea that ethnicity has nothing to do with place of birth, but is based in ancestry and tradition. So in closing, if we take the original definition of ethnicity as defined by the ancient Hellenes, we have something quite easily understood and observable as a common identity based in ancestry, essentially a wider family group. Now to the second word, nationalism. Nationalism is another word that is highly charged in the modern climate and is often seen as being exclusively a right-wing idea. Yet its basic premise is quite reasonable. And again, I would say that if you removed all the media hype, it is something unconsciously accepted by nearly everyone. I mean, let's take a look at something heavily promoted by the Hollywood elite and nearly every single left-wing organization in the world in the 1990s, the Free Tibet movement. Their goal, both then and now, was essentially a Tibet for Tibetans, an independent Tibet free of Chinese rule. Here is their current mission statement: a free Tibet in which Tibetans are able to determine their own future and the human rights of all are respected. And here is the Oxford English Dictionary definition of nationalism: identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. From the Free Tibet mission statement, Tibetans clearly and rightfully identify themselves with their own nation, their desire to determine their own future emphasizes their support for their nation's interests. And because Tibet is currently under the control of China, the only way to free Tibet would be at the exclusion and detriment to the Chinese. This is made crystal clear in the second paragraph of the statement, where they say, and I quote, "and an end to China's occupation." If you support the Tibetan people's endeavour to end Chinese occupation and govern themselves in their own historic nation, then you agree with at least the basics of nationalism. Many believe nationalism to be a new phenomenon, only occurring in the last few hundred years or so. This is, in my opinion, based on the modern idea of what constitutes a nation state. Whilst the word in its current usage may not have been in existence, its underlying principles, I would argue, have always been the foundation of human groupings, and are even inherent in the animal kingdom. Let's look again at the definition of nationalism, only this time we will switch the word nation with the word pack, as in pack of wolves. Identification with one's own pack and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other packs. Now, I'll admit, I am no expert on wolves, but I don't think anyone would argue a wolf doesn't identify with its own pack, support its own pack's interests, whilst excluding other packs from breeding rights and territory. Some people might say that a pack isn't really comparable to a modern nation, and this is true to some extent, but what is a nation? If you are talking about a nation state, a country, then whilst a wolf pack is certainly not anywhere near as sophisticated as a modern nation, all the basics are there. There is a strict system of leadership based on hierarchy and trust. They are, like us, highly social creatures that work together towards a common goal. And whilst they do not have laws, unwanted behaviours are punished by the dominant pair. Wolves are also highly territorial, and each pack has a defined area of control. Whilst these boundaries are normally respected by other packs, in times of need, fighting can occur for vital resources, so territorial sizes can and do increase and decrease. Whilst in our arrogance we may see ourselves as far more sophisticated and enlightened than our animal neighbours, the basic desires are still the same: land, community, and posterity. The word nation, though, whilst it can be used as an alternative term for country or state, its origin and meaning are a little deeper. The word nation comes to us via the Latin natio, meaning birth, people, race, or class, and itself coming from a Proto-Italic word for family. Some of you may notice how strikingly similar this is to the word ethnicity, and this is further reflected in the modern Oxford English Dictionary's definition of the word nation. A large body of people united by common descent, history, culture, or language, inhabiting a particular country or territory. Whilst the modern definition describes a nation as a body of people united by either ancestry, history, culture, or language, the word ethnicity, in its original understanding, covers them all. Both nation and ethnicity have drifted a little from their original meanings today to include these either or options, but it is clear from both of their origins a common ancestry was essential for any group of people to fall under either classification. That is, that in the original sense, a nation or ethnic group must have a shared ancestry. So to the original question, what is ethnic nationalism? Ethnic nationalism is the idea that people are not just some random event, but that every person was uniquely crafted by their history and ancestry. That over millennia, groups who shared in these commonalities forged societies and nations uniquely adapted to their needs. It is the idea that all men and women are not just interchangeable commodities, but that they belong to a place and a group, and that this group has a right to maintain its heritage and traditions, as well as freely govern itself in its own homelands, in a way that preserves and serves their unique identity. The ethnic nationalist believes that only a people united by ancestry, history, and tradition can produce a society that is in line with the individual's goals and standards, and that this idea is rooted not only in the evolution of man, but in all of nature.